That was pretty wild.
Like
all right, Luke, we're live. So you're going to be filming, right? You're going to put it on this guy?
Yeah.
So when people start asking questions, you're responsible for letting us know what kind of questions they're asking.
Sounds good.
All right.
Are you prepared to have
Cool.
a dog all up in there? Or you want me to be the dog minder?
Poor bees. Oh my God.
All right. Cool.
So this is like cutting out something all out.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Need to like tilt it?
Yeah, you have to like stop.
Closer?
Let's see if that's
Okay. Can you turn it sideways?
It says.
Hey, look, Asen's on here. Asen, say hey to your crew. Can you hold it back here?
Good old Sid.
How about right here? You can just focus on who's talking.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. We're working out the logistics.
that'd be fun.
This isn't anything for Brad because he got interviewed on the live stream, the Global MX-5 race, so it's no big deal.
No, that was pretty cool. That's the first time we've talked, because we see Tony Laporta is like, he works like a madman running up and down pit lane, and usually if he comes up to you, it's something bad because your car's out.
Yeah.
That was pretty cool.
Yeah, it is awesome. Cool. Well, we'll get started, and let us know when there's when people are joining and stuff. If we get 10, 15, 20 people or whatever, Luke, let us know so we can just know how big our audience is. But
Sounds good.
welcome everybody. Make sure to share this video because that helps us get in front of more people. Like it, share it. We're with Possien Motorsports Development. We got Brad Little and Blake West here conveniently with their names on their shirts, so I can't mess it up. And then we got the man himself. We got Doc over here who owns PHMD. So these guys race in the Global MX-5 Cup Series, professional series, probably the most competitive series I would say as far as like actual distance between competitors. There is. Yeah. So they were in Road America this past weekend. Had an awesome event, top 10 finish, and like I said, the most competitive series there is. So we're here to talk to them about track prep. But I'll let you just explain what you guys are all about, what you do, real quick. If y'all want to speak to that.
Brad, good looks at me. What do we do, Doc?
Well, I mean, I just figured I'd let you have the floor, but no, we're a Pro MX-5 race team. We also do some endurance stuff with WRL and AER. We're also a full-blown race prep shop as well. Do pretty much anything that anybody needs, from brakes to setups, alignments, four-corner scaling, pretty much all that.
Awesome. Cool. And if you don't mind, just type in the comments or something, Luke, and make sure the volume's good with everybody. Hopefully we're capturing everything. And maybe we'll walk out after this and do a little tour of the shop.
Yeah.
Take the before we end the live video. But awesome. So if you're looking to go up to Global MX-5 Cup, these are your guys right here. I'm pumped. I'm believe racing against you next month actually at WRL.
Yeah.
So, hopefully we can still be friends after that. I think so.
Put that target on the back of your car there, Andrew. I'll instruct the drivers exactly
We'll follow
what
up
to do.
on how that goes.
Yeah.
We'll definitely follow up. But,
We'll probably share a couple of.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we'll have a couple of cold beer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's right. But they sell obviously these beautiful race tech seats. Royal Purple fluids, and then we've also got our newest Apex Pro retailer in the Birmingham metro area. So we're excited to have these guys selling our product and bringing a new level of credibility to what we do because they compete, at a very, very high level. But we've got our kind of lineup here for what we're going to talk about. And today's topic we've been talking about for a couple of weeks, but it's what do you need to do to your car before you take it on track? And we're talking to everybody from if you're paying somebody to do a arrive and drive like these guys do, what are they actually doing on your car? Some of the more sophisticated stuff, all the way down to, hey, I've got, my street car that I'm going to take on the track that I just bought, or my Hertz rental car, cough, cough, right?
Yeah.
What do I need to look at?
That's never happened. You've certainly never done an injury.
No,
Right.
Never. Always buy the best policy you can get on insurance. Right? So we'll go through the list here. I'm just going to ask these guys about the three things we have up here, and hopefully we'll share something that the audience here learns from. And if anybody has questions, we got Luke behind the camera. He's an extremely professional videographer, so he's going to be making sure that we answer any questions that y'all have. So as we're going through tonight's topic, just lay a question down in the comments and we'll get back to you. But let's talk about brakes. Talk about some brakes. So what's important to look at on your brakes? What do you guys prioritize when the car comes in the shop or you're prepping your own car? What are you looking for? Say somebody buys a new car, and what do you want to check first thing with regard to the brake system?
I would say for track use, the biggest thing is the fluid, because a lot of people go out there in their brand new street car and, you know, they'll have standard .3 fluid and they'll boil it, you know, going into a turn. We're big fans of Castrol SRF, not sponsored or anything. It's a good product. You know, Motul makes some pretty good stuff too.
Yeah.
And for like pads and rotors, a lot of people instantly want to go to some crazy Brembo or Willwood setup when they're still on stock pads. So that's also a huge thing, you know. If you get some kind of like street and track pad, then that'll go pretty far away.
Yeah, especially if you're just now getting into doing some track day stuff with your street car. Hawk makes a decent pad. There's a couple different companies that make a pretty decent pad, and you don't have to spend a fortune to start, you know, actually getting some performance out of your brakes. Brake fluid is very important. You need something that's got a high boiling temperature, because a lot of people buy these Corvettes, Porsches, stuff like that. Mainly the vet people will get out and really start getting on their cars. Turn 3 and turn 4, fluid starts to get hot, and they start to get a very sloppy brake pedal, and then they have to come off track, and they're like, oh, what's going on? So make sure you do have the proper brake fluid in there before you go on the track. What we do every weekend is, when we get back from the track, we'll unload the car, put it up on the rack. We check brake pad wear, rotor wear, look to see how the fluid's looking as far as if it's dark or if it's still clear. And we do always put new pads and rotors before the weekend. New pads and rotors on the MX-5 Cup, they usually last the whole weekend. You don't have to change them. Track day stuff, just depending on how heavy the car is, I would look at the pad wear in between your sessions.
Yeah, because a heavier car is going to wear brakes a lot more.
Definitely.
So would you say it's probably more important, I guess, on a heavier car to? I mean, it's equally important on every
On every car, yeah, but like on your heavier cars, it is something you probably want to see more often. You want to look at it more often than you know, a car that weighs half as much.
Yeah.
So.
Is there anything you want to steer clear of? Like, I know we talked about just like OE pads, but if you had to do one thing, say a fluid flush is probably best, or do you just want to make sure there's good fluid in it? What do you prefer?
I would say good fluid is the most important thing.
Yeah.
You know, before a car goes to the track, we do like a quick pressure bleed at least, you know, just to make sure we didn't get an air bubble or two there. And then, you know, like if we're running the SRF, you know, we'll do a full flush maybe like once a season.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's good information, because I've certainly prepping race cars in the past, I've flushed the fluid way more often than I probably needed to.
Yeah. And a lot of people do. I mean, there's a lot of people out there that are religious about bleeding the brakes, you know, once or twice a weekend. You know, like Blake said, we'll pressure bleed one, and then we'll kind of watch it over the weekend, but hardly ever do we, you know, bleed them at the track anymore. I mean,
You just need like a pressure bleeding kit.
Yeah.
Yeah, so get you a pressure bleeding kit and read the instructions.
Yep. Yes. Read the instructions carefully.
Or better yet,
yeah. I
bring it in.
Oh, yeah, bring it in.
I know
We'll
two
take care of
gentlemen
it.
who are very skilled at
That's right.
taking care of that for
That's
you.
right. Well,
And you know,
that's
that's it. I don't just you know, from you know, my experience is far less than theirs. But you know, one thing is you can't just open the reservoir cap and pour SRF and still, you know, with just the, like Blake said, the .3. You know, that's not good at all. The whole system needs to be pressure bled.
Yeah, it needs all the other fluid needs to get out before you can start.
And I think the big difference between having professionals that do this, you know, professionally, right, and somebody that's learning on their own is adapting to the different situations. So like someone can go buy a pressure, you know, someone that hasn't done it before, you can go buy a pressure bleeding kit, get the right fluid, and if everything goes to plan, your, you know, master cylinder's in good shape, you know, you don't have any leaks in any of the lines, all the brakes are in decent shape, it might work. But the big difference between guys that know exactly what they're doing is if there's any small issue and you haven't done it before, you won't be able to adapt to it, and you might make a critical mistake.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas when you've got guys that do it day in and day out, and that's really, in my mind, that's, you know, what you're paying for is that level of sophistication, like almost your muscle memory. You can probably bleed a brake system and solve problems that you know, people won't solve that'll take people hours and hours and hours to figure out.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of benefits to having somebody look at like the key components of the car, and I think that's why brakes is number one. It's like if you're not sure, you know, say you're taking your car to the track and you're not sure if your brakes are adequate for it, somebody like these guys will be a very, very good investment of your time, even if it's just, you know, the first time to take a look at it and you know, have somebody consult with you that knows what they're doing, all the way up to, you know, doing rotors and pads every weekend. Because some cars don't need, you know, I've had cars before that need rotors and pads. You can do 3, 4, 5, 6 events, right?
Yeah.
And then I've also had a late model stock car that needed them more than every weekend.
Yeah. Yeah, that's about normal. I mean,
What would you think, Andrew? Because I know you've done, you know, considerable amount of coaching too. You know, especially newer HPDE students. They're coming in, and what's one of their typical mistakes? I would say it's overslowing corners.
Yeah.
So you're really hammering on the rotors and the brake pads.
Absolutely.
And, you know, which can lead to warped rotors, and, you know, you need to check those brake pads. I mean, I know these guys, as soon as the car comes in, you know, under our tent, we open the hood, let the engine cool down. Once that's done, car's up on jack stands, we're checking brakes.
Yeah.
One of the first things that get checked.
Yeah.
Well, and wheel bearings.
yeah.
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 Which we'll get to.
Yeah.
I didn't know if you agreed with that. You know, probably
Oh, no,
some of
absolutely.
you know, yes, it's important for all of us to check that, but I would think newer students, there would be a huge thing to think about.
Yeah, I think it's huge in my experience with coaching, and these guys can you know, validate this. But a lot of times, until you understand the physics of the car and how you're supposed to attack that brake pedal when you're in a straight line, right?
Yeah.
And that does several things for you. It slows the car down while you don't have any lateral acceleration in the car. It's all longitudinal, right? Your hands are straight on the wheel. But what it also does is it allows you to come off the brake pedal at the slower part of the corner, which allows the brake pads to get off the mating surface on the rotors and have air pass through them so they actually cool. Whereas a lot of people want to gently apply the brake pedal because in their mind that is how you protect the car.
Right.
But it does the exact opposite because it means you have more brake pressure at a slower point on the track. And a lot of times that's why people tend to, probably brake companies probably do well for people treating their car like that because
for
you know,
sure.
I need more brake under there, right?
Oh yeah.
But
Engine loves you.
That's right. But in reality, if we can get the technique down, a lot of times that can solve a lot of those problems. And that's
Oh, for
where
sure.
I think that this is a cool conversation to have because a lot of times the driving tendencies and what the driver's doing and how the prep and, you know, the team that's working on the car, the driver that's prepping their own car interact is really important. A
It's
lot of
very
times
important.
that's the same person.
Yeah,
Right? So it's, you got to understand it from two different sides.
Oh yeah.
But we have any brake related questions, Luke?
Not yet.
Awesome. If anybody has any thoughts or comments or just wants to share like a funny story, that's always good too. You want to talk about suspension? What do we think is important? So I know that I've, you know, in the past, would always nut and bolt, you know, major parts on the suspension is in just like put a wrench on everything and make sure nothing's turning. But what do people need to know about that?
The first thing is when you say nut and bolt, that's literally putting a wrench on every single bolt on your suspension, upper and lower control arms, sway bar links, your brake calipers, axle nut. You're checking everything to make sure everything's properly tightened. Shock mounts, lower shock bolts, all that stuff.
You also want to be careful about over torquing things too, though. Like
Yes.
what we like to do is we'll nut and bolt everything. You know, put a wrench on and make sure everything's tight, and then we'll get a paint pen and mark the bolt and whatever it's fastening, and that way you don't have to put a wrench on it every time. You can look at it and see if it's moved,
Yeah.
and that way you know you're not overstressing all your hardware and and snapping stuff left and right.
Yo,
Yeah.
keep going. I'm gonna do a little diagram.
We actually have a brake related question if y'all want to see that one.
Yeah, we can go back to that.
Yeah, it's from John Allen. He says, do you feel pressure bleeders compared to old-fashioned method provide any real benefit other than convenience?
What we usually use is a Mighty Vac vacuum bleeder to do like full flushes. However, there's something just like satisfying about the old school, like
old
get a
school,
bleeder
yeah.
bottle and two people, just you know, for the peace of mind to like actually make sure that there's no air bubbles coming out of there. So
Yeah.
you know, some people are more comfortable with the pressure bleeders, you know, they go like on top of the Masters, but we like to do that. So that's a
Yeah.
little bit of personal preference, but I feel like it's more like 100%.
Oh
you
yeah,
know?
yeah. I get a better feeling when you're actually pumping them up and bleeding them. That way you know exactly how firm they are when you start, and then when you get done bleeding, you can actually tell the difference. So.
Yeah, when I'm seeing you like flex the whole firewall.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I make sure that breakdown's good.
I trust that. Put some torque on it.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Have you seen these feet?
I would agree with that. I always like the way that the pressure bleeder. I just could feel it. I personally thought I could feel a difference.
Yeah.
And I think it
might be, but I mean it just gives you a better feel of it. I mean.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That ain't going nowhere. That's perfect.
That's right. It's like every time any man straps something down on the trailer.
That ain't going nowhere.
That's right. And I think
You have to say it.
Yeah. I saw that meme and I thought back on it. So I've
That's
said
true.
that every single time.
time.
We do it. We do it
At
laugh
least
about it.
50 times
At least.
when we load a trailer.
Yep. Every strap we put on the trailer, that ain't going nowhere.
Yeah. So I wanted to exercise my artist kind of genius, but this is just our head of a bolt, and I wanted to touch on what Blake said when he said he marks it with a paint pen, and I'm sure some people already do this, but what you're going to get from like a professional prep shop, or what you're going to see any pro team do is, right, this is your fastener, and this is your, whatever it's attaching to,
Yeah.
right? So this is clamping something on, that's your control arm or whatever, but they're going to mark the actual fastener itself, and then they're going to mark whatever it's fastened to, so that the next time they go in there, they can see if this paint mark has moved, right?
It's
And-
quick reference, very quick reference.
Yeah, quick reference so you know if you need
Oh,
to
yeah.
check it or replace it. And then a lot of times the fastener itself is going to fatigue, right? So
Yeah,
that's
especially
something
like
Eccentric.
eccentrics, because we're loosening and tightening, because that's your toe and your camber adjustment. So
Right.
after a couple, tightening those down, we replace them because they will stretch.
yeah,
And the bad thing about those is once the bolt's stretched, not necessarily will you see that mark move. You'll see it when you start to actually measure the camber. You'll be like, "Oh, the camber's off." Well, that mark's good. Then the bolt's stretched. So that's a good reference, especially if you're crunched for time and like in between sessions. Say you get off track, you got maybe 15, 30 minutes. You can't nut and bolt the whole car. You can look up under it with a flashlight and be like, "That hadn't moved. That hadn't moved. That hadn't moved."
Right.
And then you know exactly how many times you've used those eccentrics. So, the life of the eccentrics just depends on how many times you actually have your car set up.
yeah.
And
on-
was that the
and-
first time we changed them up at
No.
Road America? That's the
No.
second time already this year.
Yeah,
So
Yeah,
at least.
Yeah, this is the second time.
yeah. And we'll start to know, like, every car's got its own personality, right? So
Yes.
one car might need new fasteners on something constantly, and another car, that's a part you're not going to look at or touch
Right.
for a year or more.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's probably ends up being certain things even on your global car that you're like, we've never had to touch it.
Yeah.
Like it's always been good, torque's been right or whatever.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So I think that's something you find with your own car. I learned this in the past, is you start to learn the ebb and flow of what do I need to keep a constant eye on, and what do I need to just
Yes.
check periodically, or what do I need to have, whatever you need to have peace of mind about.
Yeah.
I think that's good. Y'all mentioned bushings and bushing wear, and I think that's something that I've felt. So recently, I drove a customer's car. He was actually did some Android programming for us, and I was coaching him. And he had an old ZX2, very similar to the MX3 I'm racing
Yeah.
next weekend. But this was like a factory built car. It was built by Ford engineers a long time ago to run like street stock or some sort of class like
Right.
that. That's a drag race class, but something like that.
Yeah.
And I drove the car, and it would turn in really nicely, I think, to the left, and then if you turn to the right, it just felt like it felt like a sway bar was hung up, but I knew
It's
they weren't.
bonding, yeah.
It felt, and it ended up being bushings.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just kind of wanted to speak. They were just old, worn out bushings
Dry
that
rotted.
were not allowing for any play, totally dry
Right.
rotted. But I wanted to use that to kind of transition into bushings. Is it was a dramatic difference.
Oh, yeah.
Turning right to
Yeah,
left,
yeah.
just in that car. But yeah, what do y'all find in bushings?
That's something that just like really tends to be neglected. A lot of times people buy a car and they just don't think about it, and they might even do some of this stuff like with the brakes and suspension, but I don't know, for some reason it just seems like people always forget about bushings.
Yeah.
So I can't tell you how many times I've gotten underneath like an NA or an NB or S2000s too. And they're just rubber, so a good upgrade is to do like polyurethane bushings, give a little more stiffness. I even got those on my truck out there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's a good thing, especially if if someone's wanting to get into, you know, track day stuff and they buy a used car, that's one of the first things we tell them to look at, is look at all your chassis bushings, because a lot of times they'll be dry rotted and ripped, and you won't really know it until you actually get out on track for the first time. And you know, people just, you know, brakes are most important. Oh, we'll do brakes. We gotta have tires. You gotta look at your bushings too. Bushings is gonna make a huge difference on how that car handles.
Yeah.
So, and most time they'll be dry rot. That's usually what we see, is a lot of dry rotted. Every once in a while you'll see something that's weird, like one will be ripped in half or something weird like that. But
Yeah. So you're looking for someone's up under their car. They're looking for just worn, maybe
torn,
something
yeah.
with too much play on it. If it's a
Yes.
control arm bushing or something like that.
Yeah, you want it to where it's snug. It's not. There's not a lot of slop. There's not a lot of movement. So it's good to actually, once you get up there, actually take a jack and actually jack the wheel up and watch the travel of everything too, and see how it responds to, you know, up and down movement.
Yeah.
And that sometimes that'll catch a bushing that you might not see with your eye.
Well, that's how we found the bushings on this car that I was driving.
Okay.
Yeah. One side would droop and the other wouldn't.
Yeah.
You know, it was pretty obvious.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
he called me after the weekend. He's like, I figured out why we had different handling right to left.
Yeah, good deal.
Original bushings. So, and yeah, rubbers. I mean, when you think about like the rubber seals in
Yes.
the car, like I've got an '88 944, and all the rubber seals in the entire car are trash.
Yes.
Because they're 30 years old.
Yeah.
And bushings are like that, but they're also being worn. They're being moved, right? They're
Yeah.
being compressed, and
Yeah.
I think that's a very important thing. And you kind of spoke to the upgrade component of it. You got poly, you got Delrin.
Yeah.
Some people do solid mounted Heim joints.
Heim
There's
joints,
a million
yeah.
options, right, for different bushings. A lot of times dictated by the rules or by the
Yeah,
class.
that's true too. Yeah, if
Yeah.
you're just doing track day stuff, then you have a lot of leniency of what you want. But like if you're doing SCCA, NASA, or FARA, something like that, each class has specific, you know, things you can and cannot do. So I would definitely check that if you're into any of those, you know, leagues, to make sure you're in compliance.
Right. Would you consider motor mounts and the same thing as bushings as
I was
well?
about to just
Yeah.
throw that in there,
Yeah.
because that's, you know, I mean, we went through like 4 different revisions of motor mounts in the
Yes.
Cup cars,
Yes.
because they just kept breaking
And bending.
yeah. So that's
Yeah.
another thing to check. I mean, that's one thing we always check every time it comes off track. You know, just make sure it's all still attached and all the hardware's there.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, motor mounts and transmission mounts too. Make
Yeah.
sure.
Or powertrain braces.
Yeah, powertrain braces. Anything that like, especially most of your motor mounts, like ours, are solid, but there's some that have rubber inserts. Make sure the rubber inserts are good on those. Transmission as well, because if you have a bad transmission bushing and you're trying to put power down, you'll hear something, you know, hit the tunnel, and you're like, well, what I hit? No, it's transmission's moving, because
Yeah.
you usually only have one mount holding that thing down. So.
And if it's a center mounted, you know, transmission
Yeah.
on transaxle, a lot of times that'll actually change the shift
It
pattern
will.
too, right?
Yeah, it will.
Yeah.
It'll tilt just ever so slightly to whatever side.
Yeah. So that's something I think to recap on all that. What I'm hearing is, first of all, actually look at them, get up under the car, and
Yes.
find all the rubber bushings and look at the wear and tear. If your shift pattern's real sloppy, that could be an indication.
Yeah, that shifter bushing, especially in your older NA Miatas and NB Miatas, that's a common problem. They just get worn out, and they have these brass ones now. Is it brass that everybody's going to? The little bushing in that cup.
I think they're bronze.
They have those, and they work a lot better. The older ones just wear out over time, and then you'll get slop. You can actually, it'd be in first gear, and you can still move the car like this.
Yeah.
That's
We got
one
fortunately
thing.
experienced
We
that
did.
at Dakota this year,
Yeah.
and we
Oh,
really
yeah,
thought we
ours-
had a bad transmission, but
It was actually
shifter bushing
a shifter
that
cup.
was
Yeah.
shot. Well, the transmission was going.
Yeah,
shot.
it was going shot, but the cup.
That was thanks to our good friends at ACT.
But yeah, it's,
Well.
so yeah, that's something to definitely look at, especially if you know, once again, if you buy an older track car, it's not new and you don't know anything. If nobody's went through it, that's some steps you need to follow.
Yeah.
Especially.
So
If anybody out there that's listening has ever changed bushings, tell us about your experience. And if we'd love to hear about it.
Oh, yeah.
Were you glad you did those yourself, or would you have rather paid somebody to do it? We'd love to hear about that.
Yeah.
You have
So Clifford Robertson has a couple questions. He first wants to know, how long would you expect urethane bushings to last?
Urethane?
I mean, under hard use, I mean, at least a few years.
Yeah, I would say with the urethane bushings, you could probably get just for instance, if you're running an SCCA circuit, I would say you might could get away with 3 seasons on urethane than rubber.
As long as you preload them.
Yeah, definitely preload them when you put them in.
So what do you mean by preload?
Go ahead, I'll let you answer this one. You're the master of preload.
That's because you don't like the preload. So if your car is on jack stands or on the lift or something, all your suspension is at full droop. So you take everything off, and then you replace all your bushings, and then you get it all back together, and then you ugga it on, and so it's still at full droop. So then you go to set it back down, and then it's going to be bound up because your suspension is way down here, and then your car is trying to come down on it. So you're going to get a lot of premature wear that you shouldn't get. We usually either reassemble it. I mean, if you get to know the car that well, then you can tell when your control arms are at the right angle.
Yeah.
So I mean, if it's on the lift, then you can just get a pole jack or something and jack it up to where it is. But if not, we've done it on the scale pads too, because that's when it's on the hub stands, that's exactly where it sits at static ride height. But that's a big rookie mistake, and it's very important. So
Yeah, preload your bushings.
Yes.
Easier said than done.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So it's second. Yeah. So it's the second question, going back to brakes. He said, assuming you want to change before the performance decreases, what amount of brake pad material would you advise before changing? Asking for a stock Miata.
A stock Miata, we usually, if the pad is thinner than the backing plate, is when about the same thickness as your backing plate or lower than the backing plate is when we recommend to have them changed.
That's fantastic advice.
Because I mean that's about all the pad you got left pretty much. Especially with like our Paget pads, they have, I guess they're rivets in them, so you can't really judge it because once it gets to the backing plate, you can see it start getting into the rivets.
Mm.
So once it's as thick as the backing plate, that's when you want to change it. You don't want to get past that because you wind up, sometimes you can just change pads and get away with not changing rotors. But if you go down past that material, you're going to wind up getting in the rotor, and it's not gonna be
Where's
good.
our Willwood pads? I'll actually go, or the Paget. I'll go get a set so you
In the
can
parts
show.
room.
Okay, I'll be right back.
We're gonna go get some, so you know a little visual. Yeah, that's the benefit of being at the shop.
Yeah.
Do you think we answered Clifford? Let us know if we answered your question adequately. Do you have anything to speak to on the benefits of changing pads and rotors at the same time? Because I know that's ideally you want new pad material, new rotor.
New rotor, yeah.
Made them together, right? But does that give you a little more? You get a little bit longer pad life, a little bit longer wear life on pads and rotors.
Both, yeah.
that's a big controversial topic. Everyone's very opinionated on it. So
Yeah.
we don't do that on race cars. But I mean, I'd be lying if I said I haven't just slapped some pads on my truck. So
Yeah.
it's kind of at your discretion, I guess.
Yeah. It's probably the biggest thing is how sensitive you are to, the brakes and the way they feel are going to be pretty affected by slapping,
Yes.
new pads on old rotors and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I think, when I was running my Accordion World Challenge, we would always start, brand new pad, new rotor, and then we would run one more set of pads, usually maybe
Yeah.
even 2 before we go to the new rotors.
Right.
But after that, once you started getting them, too many different heat cycles with different pads on the rotors, you would start feeling it in the pedal.
You get and that's the thing is when you do change pads and not rotors, sometimes you wind up warping the rotors.
Yeah.
And it just, like you said, it feels totally different.
Mm.
All right, this is good, yeah. So you can tell the material here. This is your actual pad. This is your backing plate. And if you look down in here, there's actual rivets that hold this on. So what we recommend is once your pad gets about this thick here, about as thick as this backing plate, that's when you want to change them. Because once it gets past that, it'll start getting in those rivets, and that'll put grooves in your rotors.
Cool.
So
That's good info.
Sweet.
You got another question?
Yeah, we got a question from Chris, and he asked, do you have to preload poly bushings? I was under the impression that you did not have to if the sleeve is properly lubed.
if it's got sleeves in it, I don't think you'd have to. But if it's the rubber ones like what's on our car, we always preload them because they're kind of like a fixed bushing. They don't really have a sleeve in them.
Yeah. I mean, I do them just out of habit still, but I guess you wouldn't necessarily have to.
No,
It'd still be a good thing to do,
Yeah.
though, right?
I mean,
what
it-
harm are you going to do by doing it?
Yeah.
Versus
Not really.
the harm you can
Yeah.
do without doing it.
true.
Yeah. So it's possible. I guess the upside is you can always get better wear characteristics if you do it.
Yeah,
But
pretty much.
if the bushing comes prepped already, you might not get better wear characteristics. But if you don't know if that's the type
Right.
of bushing or not, that needs to be
True.
preloaded.
Yeah.
Because there's all sorts of different types of bushings. Like you have compliance bushings on a lot of economy cars. You got bushings all have different wear, and
Oh yeah.
you know we had on the Accord I ran in World Challenge, we had compliance bushings on the front control arm, which basically minimize. I mean, they're horrible from a racing
Right.
standpoint, but we wanted to go to poly with them. But they do tow and you know they adjust. They basically like locate you know like the shock and the control arm, right?
Yeah.
So they couldn't really get around them, right? The best thing to do is just buy new control arms.
Right,
You got new bushings, but great question. Thanks. Chris is a good friend of mine. We raced together. How's it going, Chris? Good guy. All right. So that's a lot about suspension. I think talking about bushings is a really cool topic because it's commonly misunderstood.
Yeah, and it's just something people overlook a lot. I mean, it's not, you know, when you think about going on a track, the first thing is safety, and they're like, oh, you know, I got to stop, you know, and it's very easy to neglect, you know, something as small as a bushing, which could cause a lot of problems.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. And would you say the higher grip the car's capable of,
Yes.
the more tire you put on it, the more important
the
it
more
becomes?
important it becomes, yeah, especially if you're running slicks, you'll find out real quick if you have a bad bushing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty aggressive. I mean,
Yeah.
it's pretty insane.
So the closer to the original design parameters the car is, the less important some of this
Yes.
stuff will be noticeable. But as you start going down the slippery slope of modifying your car, something
Right.
like bushings is going to go straight
Oh
to
yeah,
the top of the
definitely,
list.
definitely.
Yeah. I think our last topic is wheel bearings, and I have several experiences on this topic. I'll let you guys roll with it because that's definitely something that you want working for you.
That kind of ties into suspension a little bit with like looking over everything and, you know, with nut and bolting. Like, you know, play anywhere can give you or tell you a lot of things, I guess you'd say. You know,
Yeah.
so I mean, like every time a car comes off track, you know, like we're like shaking the wheels, checking the wheel bearings, and moving it left to right and up and down, checking the steering and the bearings. You know, but if you have some play in your steering wheel, that's another reason to look at all your front end stuff. But I mean, that bearings can be a disaster. So
Oh yeah, yeah. You could lose the whole wheel assembly.
you know, I mean, we replace them on a schedule, not before they go bad, just because, you know, from a safety standpoint. You know, we do them like 3 times a season.
Yeah.
So pretty much every 2 events, we do all new bearings.
Is that something you get from the series or from Mazda?
We actually,
to do that?
we get them straight from Mazda.
Okay.
It's a factory bearing with the ABS plug on it. And,
Gotcha.
How about the idea to change it
Yeah. Do
that
they,
often?
do they give you the intervals or?
No, usually it's kind of weird because I guess it's preference. We do ours on a schedule just because we don't want to get to that point where we actually have a bearing go bad.
Right.
And we will change it if there's, you know, any kind of play in it. Because these are not like your typical, like a trailer bearing or something that you can take that center nut and tighten it up and the play will be gone.
Mhm.
These are actually sealed bearings, which is a whole hub assembly that
Right.
bolt on to, you know, your I guess your upright. So if you get any play in that, there's no fixing it. I mean, it's replace it. And especially running slicks, as much grip as those things produce, I mean, that is hard on a wheel bearing. That and the fact that if you jump curbs or you go off, I mean, you have to check those religiously.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was one of the first things going to tracks with these guys. They taught me, like I said, the car comes in and, you know, under the tent, hood comes up to cool the engine, whole car goes up on jack stands. And one of the first times I started getting in a hurry to go ahead, let's get those tires off, you know, let's check brakes and everything. And I think both of these guys are like, no, Docky, that's not how you do it. And they go over, and what he's talking about shaking the tires is you take it side to side and then top to bottom. You know, maybe even roll it around to see, you know, because it's going to be We found one at Watkins Glen last year, and
Yeah.
fortunately it was just a bolt that had backed out
Right.
from the, one of the retaining bolts for the bearing.
Yeah.
But I mean, I was, oh wow.
Yeah.
Yes. Brad sitting there moving the right rear tire, and I'm thinking, uh-oh, that's not good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you want to get the car up off the ground before you.
Yes,
before
definitely.
do
You want to
that.
make sure there's no load on that bearing, that it's off the ground so you can roll it and you can actually shake it. It's really hard to tell if you got any kind of play in a bearing, if it's on the ground or if it's loaded.
Yeah.
It's very hard.
And I think that, we talked about more grip, but, the higher grip tire, if you're running a slick, this is something you should do pretty regularly.
Yes, yes,
Right?
yes.
Yeah. Almost as regularly as you can, just to make sure you catch it before it does go bad. And certain cars are more, again, we talked about kind of getting to know the car, and I raced Volkswagens for a
Oh,
while
yeah.
in touring car and World Challenge, and the rear wheel bearings on Volkswagens were apparently designed for, something in the 20s or 30s. They're
Yeah.
basically a Volkswagen Beetle. They would come apart after a weekend.
Oh yeah, yeah,
6 hours of track time, 5 hours of track time, and you put a new rear wheel bearing on it.
yeah.
The fronts were basically good for as long as they could possibly go. But
Right.
when I transitioned to a different car, we went to a Honda Accord, the wheel bearings were kind of overbuilt, and
Yeah.
they would handle the slick fairly well, but we still checked them and were very
Yeah.
sensitive to them. We still had to, I think every 3 events we did rears.
Yeah.
But it's something that I don't see many people checking wheel bearing. At a track day, I don't know that I've ever seen anybody going and checking their bearings, and it's certainly something I've done.
Yeah.
And if you do have play in a bearing, then I mean, if you think about it, while you're going down down the track, I mean, and if it's going like that, I mean, it's messing with your alignment too. So I mean, if you're trying to be competitive, then that's not competitive.
Yeah.
All of a sudden you're 10 millimeters toe out.
Yeah. And it's messing with tire wear and
Oh, yeah.
everything
Yeah.
else. Yeah.
And a lot of these things we're even talking about today, because I know, in a lot of, we use HPD, and you know this, as test days, because
Yeah.
smaller teams, we can't go rent Barber for a day. It's a little prohibitive, but we can go out when Chin or just track it is out at Barber, and it's relatively inexpensive testing for us.
Yeah.
But one of the mistakes we see, from HPDE folks is they show up with their street car. They may or may not have it in a trailer. They may have driven it to the track, but what do they not have? 4 jack stands and a floor jack. Get that car up in the air so you can check. Everything we've talked about today is you can check it right there at the track. Everything we've talked about.
Yeah. It's
Absolutely.
not nothing, you need a mechanic there for. It's plain and simple. And a lot of people, they want to do things themselves, and it's good to know or get in a habit of sometimes making a list before you get to the track, so the things that you need to hit on and check after each session. So yeah, it's good to get in the habit of checking those and making you a list
Yeah.
and carrying. And a lot of people that do drive their car to the track, especially at a Miata, they don't have a lot of room, for
Yeah.
like a jack stand, stuff like that. But get in the habit of doing it before you get there, and then like after your day is over, check it. Once you get home,
Yeah.
or where you can get somewhere to do that.
Right. Absolutely. Or find your community of friends and.
That's another thing.
Other
And there's
people.
so many cool people at track day things. You'll make friends left and right. They're everywhere, just nice people, and you'll learn different tricks from those guys too.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely, and the big benefit too is, and this is something we talk about a lot in talking about driving advice, is that sometimes advice is as good as what you pay for, right?
Right.
Because if it's someone that you trust, you kind of have to know what their relative experience level is.
Yeah.
Which is why it's nice, even if you don't plan on having a prep shop prep your car, it's really nice to bring it to somebody like these guys, especially if you're in the Birmingham, Atlanta metro area. Bring it to these guys here and let them kind of baseline your car and understand, get a nice alignment on it, do a setup on it,
Yeah.
give you some ideas about, hey, I'm going to be taking it to myself, I'm the only guy at the track. Let these guys tell you what they would look for, and then temper that with maybe some other people that run that same type and make of car, and start to learn, because if you haven't been running the car for a couple of years, sometimes having those
those people come in handy. Yeah.
So that's another great thing that a prep shop can do for you, is these guys aren't just there to go, they would love to do that kind of work as well.
Oh, yeah,
Not
yeah.
just, go and do the entire ride and drive portfolio, right?
Right.
But that is the big benefit when you show up and you race with, you know, an arrive and drive team, and you're the driver. I love that environment. I've run my.
Oh yeah.
I'm not checking bushing. There's a reason my hands look like this and Blake's hands look like that, right?
Oh yeah.
Because I'm no good at it. You don't want me working on your car, right? I can talk about it, but man, working on it's a different story. It takes talent and experience, and it takes concerted. We talk about in driving a lot. A lot of people say seat time is the key, and I would say seat time is the key if you use it for the right things and you actually practice things that help you improve. If you just go up there and turn laps, you might not get any better. And it's the same thing with turning wrenches.
Oh yeah.
If you just sit there and make mistakes all day long and never think about doing anything different, I mean, I'm sure you guys all the time have internal discussions about, we put it on the setup pad this way last time and this happened and we didn't quite get this the way we wanted, so now we're going to change it, right? And you're going to improve, right? You're going to get better.
Yeah, we do that a lot.
I'm amazed how these guys don't over torque stuff, you know, but they torque it right. Me, my limited experience, I need to see some torque specs on something. But, you know, when you say for somebody, you know, he's just bought that Z06, I'm going to take it to Barber for chin track decks. And he's going to go out there. I mean, he needs to know torque specs on what just about every bolt he can put a wrench on. So he's not
Especially wheels. Yeah.
torquing the fire out of it.
And torque your wheels.
Yeah. Torque, yes, please carry it. If there's one thing you can carry with you, let it be the proper lug nut socket for your wheels that you have and a torque wrench. That is one thing that I think a lot of people, because if they're not torqued and you're beating on that car, they'll start to back off, and sometimes you'll have a wheel come off, sometimes you'll wind up breaking wheel studs. So that's a very important thing to think about.
Yep. And especially running slicks and stuff like that too. You start talking about lug studs. I mean, lug studs have fatigue life characteristics too.
Yes. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, they do.
Did we find one of those?
Yeah, we
Recent experience?
we had one that broke this
ARPs.
weekend.
Yep.
And so, I mean, and we've got those, when we do wheel bearings, we put new studs in. So, I mean, and that might be overkill. I mean, studs last a while, but, I mean, you're already there, you might as well put new studs in.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
but-
The relative expense up front saves
Oh,
a lot of heartache.
definitely, because you have a wheel come off, that might do fender damage, body damage. I mean, you don't know. I mean, I've seen a wheel come off and rupture a brake line. So I mean, there's some things that can mess up real quick if you don't torque your wheels.
Right. What about over torquing? I've actually seen
Yeah.
over torque
I'm
problems.
surprised
as well.
both of them didn't look at me.
Yeah, Cocky, what about that over torquing?
I thought about it.
We actually had a car, the Accord that the HMA team ran that Rita, her coach Josh, he wasn't driving it at the time, but they had been using an impact driver that was a little aggressive, and so they crank them on there, and a couple of times they'd left the impact driver on a little too long and really pounding them in there, and they were torquing them probably 10 pounds too high.
Yeah.
And we had turn 11 at Laguna, left-hander onto the front straightaway, real tight. The left or the right rear loaded up, and the lug studs all sheared at once.
Yeah.
Ooh.
And
They sure will.
yeah, and that was from over torquing. So that's something to be.
Yeah, over torquing. The same thing as your eccentric bolts. I mean, once they get over torqued so much, it stretches them, and I mean, it makes them weak.
And it's just as dangerous as leaving stuff loose.
Yeah.
That's why, you know, when you torque your wheels, you know, with it up in the air, you want it snug but not tight, and then you want to feel the final torque with your torque wrench.
Yes.
Yeah.
You don't want it to click right off the bat.
Right.
So when you're running an impact driver up there, do you even let it on
No.
there at all? You just run it up against
We do one
UGA.
One UGA.
one UGA?
One UGA.
Yeah.
Sometimes two.
I don't know, it's probably like, what, 50 pounds maybe?
Maybe 50 pounds. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, depending on what impact you're using.
Yeah, and that's it's important to know.
Oh, yeah,
Use
yeah.
the same impact.
Yeah, get to know your impact.
Yeah. Be friends with the impact.
Yeah. And as you can tell, you know, listen to this stuff. It's almost like we could have this same conversation about like playing guitar or something.
Oh, yeah,
You know, like, there's a real art form to, like you said, the one UGA, right?
Yeah.
That's not something that the first time you go,
Yeah.
you know.
Is that one?
Yeah, right. Does that count? Is that one?
Yeah, it's
One
not
full second.
NASCAR.
Yeah, not one full second.
Yeah. And then we were talking, like Doc was saying, he tends to over torque it. I would do the same thing. If you're in and around the same car and you're getting to that point of familiarity with it, you know exactly what it feels like to get the right amount of torque on
Right.
a certain bolt.
Yeah.
And that's again what you're paying for when you talk about. I think, you know, some of the great things that like we can do this live session right here. We're sharing stuff that previously is like what we're trying to basically to show you guys is like there's no snake oil when you go in and have somebody like this look at the car. It's just a lot of processes that you may or may not have the time to invest in and learn and become the artist that these guys have become to be able to do it at that same level.
Yeah.
And that's what you're paying for when you come to some place like this.
Yeah.
We have a question from the audience.
No? Learn a lot.
Any more questions, Luke?
Another important thing is if you get a new set of wheels, make sure you run the lug nuts down on the wheels and back them off several times. What that does, it mushrooms out so it locks that wheel nut on there. Sometimes a lot of people have a hole right there around the wheel, and those lug nuts will come loose.
Yeah.
I mean that's another thing a lot of people.
That is an extremely good point.
Yeah, a lot of people don't think about that.
Yeah, you buy some new wheels. That's,
Oh, yeah.
That's not something that I don't think I've ever done that, but I can see how that would be a huge problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we kind of purposefully didn't talk about tires. We kind of got into lug nuts, but tires that's an entire different. We need to do this again.
That's one whole segment right there. Tires.
24 hours.
Yeah.
Be an endurance Facebook
Oh, yeah.
Live.
That's right.
The since we're talking about wheel bearings, one thing for those who do trailer their cars, be it a race car and a HPDE car, because we just got back from Road America, which is about 823 miles from here at the shop, one way, and we had already made that trip 2 weeks ago, and then we're up there for racing this weekend. Both of these guys got the trailer in the shop, and why'd you get the trailer in the shop?
Oh, check wheel bearings.
And what did we find?
We had a pretty long trip ahead of us, and it's much easier to do work, at the shop with all your tools laid out and nice concrete floor instead of, grass on the side of the road.
Yeah.
So, we had 2 wheel bearings that were a little loose on the trailer, so we went ahead and snugged those up and, checked the tire pressures on everything, because it's easier when everything's at your disposal.
Yeah.
Check everything on your trailer. I mean, it may not have to do it as often on your track or a race car, but
It's worth
these
doing.
guys do it often,
Yeah.
very often.
And that saves you a lot because especially when you're working on the car all weekend, if you have to work on the trailer on the way to the track,
Yes.
it just throws a kink in everything.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
You don't have as traveling to and from races, you don't have a lot of time to mess around.
No.
No.
It's you need to get there, and you don't need to be away from a shop or your business for a lengthier time than need be. So
Yeah.
if you take a little bit of time beforehand, it can save you a lot of time on the road.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, I had a couple of those instances. I always felt like I was the only driver that showed up in the World Challenge paddock that drove the rig to the track. I'm the one parking it, and I'm looking at all the other, the crew guys. I'm going, is it weird that I'm the one doing this? I'm not, whatever. So a couple of times we had to change a tire outside of, right in Chicago, downtown Chicago. On the way to, on the way
boy.
to, and it is something that we could have prevented if we got in a hurry before leaving and we didn't look at the tire. I could have seen that there was a belt coming loose in one of the tires. So that's a really good point. Pull it if you can get your trailer into the shop, get into the shop, or at least go out and get it off the ground.
Get it off
spin
the
the
ground.
wheels.
Definitely check the wheel bearings
Yeah.
and tire wear, especially on the trailer. If it's a 3-axle trailer, always check your middle set because they'll wear from pivoting and wearing those out like ours. We're gonna have to replace tires here pretty soon, but it's that's something that gets overlooked too. You get so excited about going to the track and you focus on your car, and sometimes the rig that gets you to the car needs to be prepped too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we have any more questions? Good. Let's walk through with the live still running. Walk through the shop real quick.
Oh,
Just
it's
let you
messy.
guys point out a couple of things. That's all right. We want to see the action, right? We want to see the motor swap. You want me to carry it?
Yeah, you can.
All right. All right, guys. This is the PHMD shop here. So we're in Pelham, Alabama, just outside of Birmingham. So what are we looking at here, guys?
Well, but this right here is our ND2 car. This is our Cup car that we run in the MX-5 Global Cup. 2017. It's been updated with a 2019 engine and wire and harness.
Gotcha. So this is the car that races in the Pro Series.
Yeah, sure is.
Yep.
Scale pallets that we just unloaded.
Yeah,
That's
we just
right.
unloaded. This
Normally
is
have the scale
alignment,
going.
Yeah, alignment rack. This is where you do your 4-corner weighting.
Yeah.
camber, caster, all that good stuff. Make sure your toes straight.
Oh yeah, good stuff. See the smart strings up there on the wall.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's
we like to use
awesome.
the hub stands, and we have the hub stands for both of our cars.
Yeah, we have
Gotcha.
4 and 5 load pattern, so we can do a lot of different cars. So
That's
that helps
awesome.
out a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
And these help out when things get wrecked.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Got our dollies.
Yeah, the Go Jacks.
Anybody ends up with some significant damage on the car, some go jacks, some dollies to
Yeah,
Tote the
that
car
helps
around.
get it in the trailer.
yeah.
And that's one of my bad decisions.
Let's take a look at the NC over here. So
Yeah,
what?
this is our endurance car. This is what we run in WRL and AER. Really fun car to run. We're getting it ready for WRL Road Atlanta.
Yeah. So we got a motor swap in this guy, right? So we got a little more horsepower.
A little bit, yeah.
Awesome. So if anybody's looking for a seat, and we're talking about WRL, next month at Road Atlanta, if anybody is interested in our Drive and Drive program, I would say that PHMD, I've been on track with them. They do a pretty good job, right?
Yeah,
These
not
guys
too
are
shabby.
awesome. not too shabby, right?
not too shabby.
There's our trailer, did some wheel bearing work on, right? And
Yeah.
checked everything on that. So this is a great space. If you're in the greater Birmingham area, Huntsville, Nashville, Atlanta, you're looking for guys that, particularly Miatas, right?
Oh, yeah,
But really any track car,
Any
like we
track
talked
car,
about, these are things that apply to everything.
Oh, to everything, yeah.
Yep.
We also have a mounter and balancer. We can do wheels and tires. If
Yep, wheels and
somebody-
tires.
somebody's racing and comes into town, needs something done, just give us a holler. We take care of you.
Awesome. All right, well, we're going to end the live video, so you guys make sure to follow Possien Hall Motorsports Development, and we'll see y'all at the track again soon, right? Maybe we'll do a follow-up when we're both at Road Atlanta racing each other.
That would be awesome. Yeah, we could do that.
All righty, thanks for joining us, everybody.